Today, Israel has promised that more aid will enter Gaza after it approved the opening of 2 humanitarian routes into the territory.
The announcement came just hours after President Biden spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the phone to express his outrage after an IDF strike killed 7 foreign aid workers in Gaza on Monday. Joining us this morning is human rights lawyer David Haig. Morning to you, David. Firstly, a significant shift in the language from President Biden during that call with Benjamin Netanyahu. We've subsequently had the announcement of 2 new aid routes into Gaza. Your reaction to that phone call and the change that we're starting to see?
Good morning to you both. I think that it's certainly a positive step in the right direction. How long it lasts and the details of it, I think we need to watch for, but it's certainly a positive step. We've seen obviously an escalation of matters over the last 24 hours, particularly overnight as well. We had the letter now signed by 750 former Supreme Court judges, barristers in England. We saw lots of infighting in the Conservative Party as well, again with various politicians saying various things about people from supporting Israel. So I think we're seeing a lot of escalation of developments now. And of course, the Biden change overnight is very significant, and we've seen some now changes in Israel, which should a positive step forward.
And just in terms of where we go from here, many people calling for an independent investigation. As we know, this convoy, they were carrying civilians. They were marked as WCK vehicles. They were in full compliance of the routes laid down by Israel, travelling down that coastal route. How worried are you that any investigation by Israel would not be entirely independent?
I think it doesn't. I think absolutely there's a worry there, because at the end of the day, that Israel is in a war footing. There is the fog of war. They are not going to want to. They've admitted that it was a mistake. I'm not an expert in that area in military strategy, and I think that everyone on the face of it, it looks suspicious. So any independent investigation, even if it did happen, how long would that take? It would take a very long time, I imagine. It's not something that's going to happen soon. And I don't think that it would change anything in the immediate or near-term future. What we need to see is obviously a ceasefire, and we need to stop civilians being murdered on a regular daily basis.
And we heard President Biden calling for an immediate ceasefire in that telephone conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu. And yet, when you look at the words of the Israeli government spokesperson last night when they announced the opening up of new aid routes, they said this increased aid will prevent a humanitarian crisis and is necessary to ensure the continuation of the fighting and to achieve the goals of the war. That doesn't sound like Israel listening to those calls for a ceasefire.
Absolutely not. And I think the one thing that's clear is that Israel has an agenda in this. They want to fulfill that completely. And they are only reacting to pressure when they have to from the likes of President Biden. And until that pressure gets enough, and until we stop arming Israel from the UK and other countries, I think Israel will continue. This is, they've thrown essentially the international community a bone here, for want of a better phrase. But I don't think the fighting is going to stop. The human rights violations are not going to stop, and the deaths of innocent civilians are not going to stop until there is a ceasefire.
And you mentioned their sales to Israel of arms, particularly from the United Kingdom. We know that pressure is now growing on the United Kingdom. We've seen more than 600 legal experts writing to the Prime Minister, including 3 former Supreme Court judges as well, saying exports must end because the UK risks breaking international law. And they use these words, a plausible risk of genocide. Now, Rishi Sunak was talking to Harry Cole here on Sun TV, saying, and Rishi Sunak said to Harry, that this is a long, protracted process. There's a formal process. Is that good enough, do you think, when there is mounting pressure from MPs of various sides and indeed these legal experts saying we have to halt arms exports to Israel?
Yeah, I don't think that's a good enough response. I think, at the end of the day now, what we've seen, this is something that's been developing. I mean, this is kind of part 2 of a letter, if you like. The original letter was a first warning shot from, I think, around 1,000 was written back, I think, in October. Then there was a finding with the International Court in January that essentially found that there was a plausible risk of genocide. So, you know, it's a lot of kind of legal backwards and forwards, but essentially the government are now on notice, even if they weren't already, from an international judicial body that there is a risk of genocide. So that's something that it's very difficult to ignore when you're arming a country that has been found to have been there to have been a risk of genocide. So if they ignore that, that's very, very problematical then from a legal perspective, but not just the government, as we've also seen as well. People, the civil servants now, are very concerned. Are they responsible themselves if they're taking part in facilitating these weapons sales to a country that is using them for plausible genocide? And these are legal issues that are going to go on and on. It's not necessarily to stop arms sales to a country that's involved in things or a plausible risk of things doesn't take that long. It can be done quickly, but it's whether or not, I think it's more of a political question rather than a legal one.
And indeed, it has been done twice in the past, hasn't it, David? The numbers from here are pretty small, but it's a point of principle. From the United States, though, they wield far greater power. And when President Biden talked about US support dependent on Israel taking specific, concrete and measurable steps to address civilian harm, the safety of aid workers, humanitarian concerns, is one of those, that support then talking about the sales of arms?
Absolutely. I think that's the key one. I mean, I've said before, one of the problems I think you've got in the international community at the moment is in terms of the UK and in terms of the US, you've got two leaders potentially in their last year, and effectively two weak leaders. So seeing what Biden did overnight was welcome, and it really is down to the US and what he does on the impact that will or will not stop Israel. I don't think that here in the UK we can have that much actual impact. I think it's all down to America, and all our eyes are on Biden.
David, sorry, I was just going to say thank you very much indeed to human rights lawyer there, David Haig.
It's a good point, isn't it, though?
It is a very good point.
Domestic agendas in election years for both of these countries are influencing
Absolutely. And of course, many people are saying, well, the UK actually only exports our sales 0.4% to Israel, of course. And I think your point was incredibly valid, which is actually it depends on the United States. And I think they really are the key player in all of this. But I thought David made some great points there. David Haig, human rights lawyer.